right here the entire time.
Yeah.
I guess we'll just jump right into it if that's okay.
Sure.
Great. So first and foremost, thanks for being here. Like we said, it's been a couple weeks now since you publicly, made that video, said you were going to talk to some people, see where the energy and resources came from, and what the reception to the idea of you running for president was like.
Right.
So since then, what's happened? Who have you met with? What's the feedback you're getting?
Since then, talked to a lot of folks, and I've gotten all ends of feedback. Some people think it's a decidedly bad idea. Other people think it's a great idea. I mean, really, the full buffet, if you want to call it that. Have tried to get away from just Charleston. Actually went to New Hampshire. I'm going to go to Iowa later this week. Just trying to get a full cross-section of different viewpoints and perspectives. And got to make a decision here shortly. I've basically given myself to in or around the Labor Day to decide, and we'll decide and move forward one way or the other.
That's coming up pretty soon.
Yeah.
Are you at liberty to say whether or not you're leaning one way or the other at this point?
What I've said is that, to my surprise, I continue to get green lights in some areas that are important to moving forward, and so, if I keep getting green lights, I think I'll continue to move the green light world.
When you say green lights, are you able to give me any specifics on that in those certain areas?
Green lights mean, is there any level of appetite for what I'm talking about? And what I'm talking about is the way in which we need to have a conversation as Republicans as to what it means to be a Republican. And that we have profound problems in Washington, D.C. with regard to debt and deficits and government spending that are not being addressed by either party. Democrats aren't talking about it. It's a contest of more versus more, and on the Republican side, it's not being talked about. And so what I'm trying to judge and get a sense of is there an appetite within Republican circles for a conversation on traditional tenets that used to be important to the Republican Party that don't seem to be these days.
Well, I did want to talk about that a little bit because, fast forward a few years back, there were a lot of, I don't know if you want to call them deficit hawks, but, they were really, for lack of a better phrase, trumping up this issue.
Yeah.
And now you don't see as much of that. So where are those folks? And
that's the $94 question. That's what I've been trying to get to the bottom of. My sense is that they're still there. I would certainly cede the fact to you that they've disappeared at the political level. So you do not, it's the three monkeys routine. I hear no evil, I see no evil, I speak no evil with regard to debt and deficits and government spending at the federal level with elected officials. Absolutely see that point. But at the same time, many of the people that I will visit with tonight are people that I got to know over 10 years of my life. 2 years in a governor's race and 8 years as a two-term governor. And the conversations that I had with these folks was, around the kitchen counter where they're struggling with how do we make our numbers work as a family, in a small business setting where they're like, we're getting squeezed here, how do we make our numbers work? My sense is that those people still exist, and their appetite for spending and debt issues is still there, but that's the $94 question of what I'm trying to figure out.
So, you say those people are still there, but there is an overwhelming support in some areas for the current administration.
Certainly. But that's, again, in a question that has no other alternative to it. And so if you look at the New Hampshire poll that was just done on this front, had the same kind of support you'd see here in South Carolina, 80, 85, 90% support, but about half of the respondents said that they would like to see the president primaried because they believed that there needed to be a debate and a conversation on, original tenets and core tenets to what the Republican Party was primarily or historically always about. And so, you're right. There is a bit of a disconnect there, and again, that's what I've been trying to figure out over these 6 weeks.
It's been, maybe a couple hundred years since a sitting president didn't get the nomination from his own party.
Correct.
So.
But in each of the 5 instances that have existed since the 1950s, in none of those cases did the challenger become the president. And so I'm under no delusions as to becoming president of the United States. But I do think you could serve a purpose in creating a conversation that needs to take place. And in every one of those 5 challengers, they either change the debate, or in some cases, they actually change the electoral outcome in the general election.
So is altering sort of the national discourse and the way we go about discussing these issues more of the goal than, say, running for the highest office? Or
I think that they're concurrent. I mean, what I said at the beginning when I laid out that video was I'm looking for ways to raise this issue. Maybe it's in running for president. Maybe it's in starting an advocacy group. The folks that have encouraged this, their point has been there is much more focus every 4 years on where we go as a country and what we mean as parties in the national presidential debate than at any other time. And we can't wait another 4 years to have this debate. That's been their contention, and that's, again, part of what I'm trying to flesh out.
So obviously the deficit is one of your, core pillars.
Yeah.
What else do you think differentiates you from the current administration, if you were to challenge?
I'd say that's the primary. I want to say that's the epicenter of where I'm coming from. That's the central focus. But at the same time, I was a governor for 8 years, and I saw, for instance, the keys and the ingredients to business investment. If you look at the business investment numbers over the last couple of months, they've cratered. And they've cratered in part because we have a looming trade war. They've cratered in part because they don't know exactly what's coming out of the White House next on not only any given week, but any given day. And people in business need some degree of predictability in terms of what they're investing in. And right now they're not doing that. So I think that there's a difference, given my business experience as a two-term governor, in attracting investment from around the globe. Whether it was with China, whether it was with Europe or other places, South Carolina is the #1 state in the union in per capita foreign direct investment. And it's because of what we tried to do and a number of other administrations have worked toward.
Obviously, South Carolina is, in some senses, very middle class, blue collar, a lot of working folks here, and we do have a lot of manufacturing. You did support some of those tax cuts that some people said benefited corporate America a little bit more than they benefited, these families that you talk about sitting around the kitchen table with. That was a couple years back.
No, but let's be clear. It is not some people. I've said that. I made national news, and you can pull it up, when I said this is fundamentally not a middle-class tax cut, but it's fundamentally a corporate tax reduction and restructuring bill. And it's a reasoned bet in terms of trying to become more competitive in a global marketplace in our ability to retain corporate headquarters and build corporate headquarters, and that's it. And that actually made national news at that time. So I would agree with you that some people said it, and I've been among them saying it. The point, though, of that bill was, again, can we become more competitive? Because if we don't have enough growth going forward, this debt deficit government spending problem is going to wipe us out, period. And if you look at overall numbers, our federal government is expected to take in about $43 trillion over the next 10 years. $43 trillion. That's without the tax cut. With the tax cut, it's $41.5 trillion. That's a 2.5% difference. And so a lot of the people who've said, "Oh, this exploding deficit," you're like, it can be said to be exploding many different things. The deficit's probably not one of them, because if I was to sit down with your family budget and say, well, there's going to be a 2.5% difference, you would not consider that explosion in one direction or the other. You'd say, well, it's a little bit detrimental over here, it's a little bit additive over here. You wouldn't say it's a complete explosion, though.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
So
let you grab this. Thank you.
Kind of circling back around to the larger theme here.
Yeah.
Do you think that there is maybe a sense of fatigue among some of these voters as to, undelivered economic promises that you can capitalize on?
Yeah. I think, in fairness to some of the people that voted for Trump, they were so worn out with the way in which Washington wasn't working for themselves and for their families that they wanted to just try something different. And I think that while he has been given merits for efforts, what ultimately were judged on are results. I think we're about to go into a recession. I think the numbers are going to get really, really bloody. And from a job standpoint, it's going to get messy. He'd said he was going to build a wall. Well, no wall's gotten built. He said he was going to get the Mexicans to pay for it, and the Mexican government has not paid for it. He said he was going to make us more secure, arguably internationally, given what's happening with trade in China and other places around the globe, we're arguably less secure. I could come up with a long list of different things that I think people would wonder about, they'd scratch their head on, where they're saying, look, we want to give this guy a try because we want a different approach, but if we don't get results that matter to ourselves and to our families, we still have a bigger issue, which is how do we get those things right?
Right. Just a couple more questions for me. you know, you have been openly critical of the president in the past, and he's fired back at you. And
Yeah.
you've talked about, you know, being on the receiving end of a mean Trump tweet.
Yeah.
You know, so with that being said, and obviously being critical of the president, you know, one could maybe argue that it didn't work out for you in your last congressional race.
Fair enough.
You know, are you worried about that division, that sort of inner party division? You know, or is that something that...
Yeah, I mean, nobody relishes the idea of being a human piñata, and I don't. But I relish even less the possibility of the American dream being that much more difficult for my 4 sons to achieve, or frankly a lot of other, you know, kids or grandkids that would be represented by the parents that are walking to the Coliseum tonight. I think we got to have a serious sit down as an American family on where we want to go and how we want to get there. And at times tenor and tone is important in getting there. And so, you know, one of my beefs with the president at times was not on policy. I voted with him about 90% of the time, but it was in the way in which messages are delivered. If somebody disagrees with you, it doesn't make them a loser. It just makes them somebody that disagrees with you. The heart of the American experiment was built on this notion that we could agree to disagree, that nobody left the room. You don't leave the room, I don't leave the room. We just agree, we disagree, or we may even come up with a solution. But there's some rhetoric going on that front that is dangerous from the standpoint of the fabric of what the founding fathers created in a system that was to be reason-based and at times additive in the way that we'd come together and find solutions.
Now, you also, you know, when you were governor, there was an expectation that you might run for president one day. You had a lot of support from the people in this state. You know, and then some things happened along the way. Things didn't exactly go according to plan. Are you worried that if you decide to take up the mantle and run, that, you know, things about potentially, you know, the affair in your past will come up and be mentioned by
I'm sure they're going to come up. I mean, you know, I'm going to take that thing with me to my grave, and it's a painful chapter of life for me, and for a lot of South Carolinians that watched me and Jenny and the boys go through that whole chapter of life. It was just difficult at many different levels. But, you know, and again, I'm not making any excuses for that chapter of life, but what you learn through going through public failure is a degree of humility and a degree of empathy that I think is important in making you a better leader going forward. And so while a lot of people were pushing president, all those kinds of things back then, I look back then and, you know, I see a shot of myself in my early 50s. I'm like, what a child. I didn't know anything about anything. There is a real seasoning to life and to your perspectives on life in the wake of public failure. You know, central to the notion of faith is this idea of repentance and redemption and the chance for growth. And so I would simply say, if I get into, I know that stuff's going to come up, yeah, but what I hope would be translated in that back and forth that would come with that are some of the lessons learned. And that's in strong contrast to what the president said. The president said there's nothing that he regrets. I regret many different things in my life, and 2009 being chief among them. And I think that we can learn from and through the regrets that come with life and be the better for it.
As you get into these final days before the Labor Day weekend, what, if any, are some last-minute factors, you know, in terms of energy and resources that you're looking for that go into this final decision that you're going to be making?
But make no mistake, there's not going to be giant, you know, energy behind something like this. This is, you know, one of those things that starts slow and either it grows and becomes something or it doesn't. But I don't want to create some there that's not there. These things are hard. It's like pushing a rock uphill. When you're talking about challenging a sitting president, given the history of those things, that's pushing a rock uphill. But again, I think the stakes are huge. I mean, we're at a critical juncture in our country's history. We're at a critical juncture in what's going to happen to our pocketbook or wallet if we don't get numbers straightened out in Washington, D.C. I think it's worthy of debate. I guess the biggest sort of litmus test for me, a final conversation with 4 sons. And I've said before, if they're a no-go, I'm a no-go. Because ultimately, they have a call on what Dad decides to do next in a way that no one else does.
There are other guys that echo your views. You know, Kasich, a lot of people, you know, that you have said that you had hoped would step up.
Correct.
So do you feel like, you know, with them not taken up the mantle as much as.
And that's part of the reason I waited since last June. I mean, this thing started last June. The night after my primary loss, a buddy calls and said, "God just cleared your calendar for a reason. I know what it is." I'm like, "So glad you got the direct connect. Fill me in." And he says, "What you need to do is primary the president." And I said to him, "That's preposterous. That's crazy." And now we're here. But what happened over that time period was there was a drumbeat over the last year plus of different people saying, "You ought to do it, and here's why. You ought to do it, and here's why. You ought to do it, and here's why." And so you end up, a little bit confused and uncertain, like, is this a message from God? Is it a message from Satan? Who's the message from? What did it mean? And where do I go from here? And again, I'm in the final throes of sorting that out.
Why are you here today?
I'm here because, again, this is a very different barometer reading than what I'll get in Charleston. Charleston's very different than the upstate of South Carolina. We're all South Carolinians at the end of the day, but there are a lot of different complexions to what makes our state so special. And so I think it's a chance to hear from folks that, working in the manufacturing sector of our state, a chance to hear from folks that have worked in the vineyards of Republican Party politics for a long time. I look forward to it.
Right. I mean, Duncan has been a big Trump supporter. So is there any, worry in that respect? Or
no, I'm going to treat him with respect. He's a former colleague. Jim Jordan, who was on the Freedom Caucus with me, is going to be here tonight. I look forward to seeing him. I've known the Vice President pleasantly over the years, just, at different juncture points when I was governor, when he was a governor. And so, no, I think that there'll be great harmony. I mean, Pence doesn't have Trump's style. He's not going to call you out as a loser or something. He I think, will be most pleasant in our interactions, and I look forward to them.
Great. All right, so last thing here.
Yeah.
How hard and fast is that Labor Day deadline?
It's pretty hard and fast. I mean, it's not Labor Day, the day,
right,
but I mean, within a couple of days, one way or the other, yeah, it's just time. Because if not, I need to move on with other areas of my life and enough exploration. I mean, the notion of a business look at something is you do your due diligence and then you make a decision. And I'm at that point of making a decision.
So you're not ready to announce today?
No, sir. But I appreciate the option.
We look forward to it.